Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Thompsin and Other Disappointments. This is a Fuck This Week edition, which, if you're new to the podcast, basically means it's just me talking. There's no guest on these ones. I've already done two with guests this week. That was Otto English, a very famous Twitter account or Twitter author, but then also a genuine author. He's got a book out, Fake History, and he's a former journalist. And then on Friday night was Professor Martin Spinelli, who is a professor at Sussex University now he's literally a professor of podcasting, although when I booked him he was a professor of media, and so we had a really interesting chat about the state of British media and its relationship with politics. It's been a really good week for guests and getting a sort of insight into these people's fuck me, what is the word? Why am I having a brain fart like not even 2 minutes into this episode? Getting an insight into these people's disciplines, into their industries. You know what I mean. We get each other by this point, right? You understand that there's going to be some brain farts in every episode. And the other thing I'm always going to do in every episode, pretty much every paragraph of me talking, is I'm going to fuck up a word or make up a word and then ask you if it's a word that it exists, Like, I'll be like, is that even a word? I've noticed I do that a lot. But you know what? If you've made it to 42 episodes of this by now, then I'm guessing you're on board with that kind of shit. So stick around. There's going to be a lot more of it. On this episode, I want to talk a little bit about, this is a thought I had this morning, is how weird is it that we've switched how we treat comedians with how we treat political figures. So you've got elected officials or standing for office, like that kind of person in a nice suit, saying the right things to the camera, committing to taxing and public services and all that shit. Somebody running for office, and then stand-up comedians. And they both talk in front of big groups of people, theatres or halls or whatever. But they're very different people. And with comedians, traditionally, what would happen is they would tell you a funny story, or they would, crack a joke, or, a one-liner or something. But you wouldn't necessarily worry about fact-checking them, or whether there was malice behind it, or whether they were being ignorant or offensive, or, and even if they were offensive, you would just sort of overlook it. You'd be like, well, he's a comedian. He's just, he's not my taste, but he's a, inverted commas, comedian. I'm not really, that's how we would treat stand-up comedians traditionally. And then with politicians, obviously, we would treat them like, if you commit to doing something, if you say that you're going to stand on this platform, like low taxation, or, not corrupt, or not starting wars, or, and then you renege on those commitments, then you scrutinise them, right? You hold them to account. And now it's like those situations are reversed. Now with politicians, we don't take them seriously at all. We don't scrutinise them. We don't hold them to account. We don't make them pay for lying to us. We expect them to lie to us. We celebrate the fact that they lie to us. If you say to a Tory voter, don't you have a problem with Boris Johnson's endless fucking self-interest and lying and narcissism and cruelty? No, you're just fucking upset. Fucking Labour voter, eh? Dumb Labour are never getting in. That sort of attitude. Like they dismiss any criticism of their guy, the blue guy or the red guy, as though it's, that's just Boris being Boris, isn't it? Eh? That's just Boris being, he's so kooky. What will he do next? We look at politicians like they're comedians in the old days. Like, he's such a rascal. I just don't know what he's going to do next. We just give them such a benefit of the doubt. We look at it like it's entertaining. We're like, yeah, Boris, he just says what he thinks, doesn't he? He doesn't give a fuck. And to the point where, Boris Johnson, and this isn't exclusive to Boris Johnson, this is definitely, a sort of populist thing. But with Boris Johnson, it extends to, international stage kind of stuff. Like, wasn't he at some event this week where he cracked a joke about fucking, was it about dead bodies or something? cracked some joke, some really inappropriate joke. And it's like watching a shit panel show. It's like they're talking about a serious subject and they want a world leader. They want a British Prime Minister to exert influence or to give their opinion or something, or show some direction or leadership. And instead, what do they get? They get Boris Johnson, fucking ex-tabloid journalist, going like, oh yeah, I've got a good gag about this, and then waiting for the applause break or some shit. It's so weird. It's like politicians are now the comedians and we forgive them as such. You know, he says something outlandish, we're like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? He's not to my taste, but, you know, that's just Boris being Boris. And then on the flip side, with comedians, we attract, we wrap scrutiny around them and we hold them to account in a way that we never did before, in a way that you should do with politicians. It's like the two are completely reversed. So now, you know, obviously the most recent, the current example of this is Dave Chappelle. So Dave Chappelle, a lot of people call him the greatest of all time. He's not my favourite comedian of all time, but fine. He said some stuff in his new special that I think is, you know, my take on his new special was there was one or two bits in there that I thought were actually close to genius. And then the rest of it I thought was, you know. And I'm not saying that in a sort of, you know, embittered or cunty, you know, snowflakey way. I mean, genuinely, as a student of stand-up, as somebody who did stand-up comedy for 5 years, as somebody who sat in countless rooms, hundreds of rooms, watching up-and-coming acts and professional acts and internationally known acts doing their shit, I can tell you that in my experience, in my opinion, what I saw in that special was a couple of really great bits and then the rest of it kind of boring, kind of drudge. But I don't know if drudge and laziness and, you know, a 95% non-hit rate, I don't know if that means that we should be scrutinising and fact-checking and fucking, like, holding him to account. It, like, as though he's fucking running for office. Because he's not. He's a stand-up comedian. And if you don't like what he says, I feel like as a comedian, you just have to fucking switch him off and watch something else. You know, I'm not a big, you know, free market guy. I'm not, you know, or even like a cancel culture guy, you know, where like, oh, can we just stop cancelling poor souls like Dave Chappelle? But I do think there's something really cringy about this idea of like, what was it, like 7 or 8 Netflix staff stormed into a fucking boardroom meeting. A boardroom meeting of Netflix with the fucking C-level execs, the CEO, the CFO, the, I don't know, fucking strategy of operations directory. There you go. Like, I'm just fucking making up words again. But you know what I mean? Like, this super senior board meeting, people sat in nice suits around circular tables talking about, well, I think we can expect a 5.2% return in South Korea next year if we accelerate the blah, blah, you know, like strategy. Just talking finance and strategy and logistics and hiring plans and ramping up and all the other shit that C-level execs talk about. And in comes this 7 or 8 fucking Twitter cunts. Like, I don't like what Dave Chappelle said in his special, so you gotta take it off. It's bigoted and it's ignorant and you have to take it off the platform. You know, it's like I get it. I understand that if he was talking about something close to home for me, if it was something sensitive for me, like, for example, childcare, right? I get fucking livid with people when they minimise the struggle of having children in the modern world and they dismiss it, or they pretend that their own situation is somehow equal to like mine and my girlfriend's situation because they had a hard weekend with their kids one fucking time. You had a hard weekend and then all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, no, well, I had a tough weekend with my son like 7 weeks ago and I guess we've both had bad months, you know, like that sort of thing. That if somebody did a stand-up routine about that where I felt like they were minimizing my shit or ridiculing it, or, you know, I might get sensitive about it, but it would never occur to me to fucking storm into the boardroom meeting and disrupt that shit and demand that he's taken off. That is as clearer example or metaphor or manifestation as what I talk about when I talk about, you know, 20 years ago, people would just argue about this stuff over a pub table. But now people say it on Twitter and they get 10,000 retweets or something and they think they have a fucking point. Because there's 10,000 other idiots out there who feel the same. And that's fine to feel the same. It's great that you have some common ground with some people on Twitter. But just because you feel emboldened and bigged up by 10,000 retweets doesn't fucking give you the right to storm in to a C-level exec meeting and demand that, like, this is, number one, it's not your company. Number two, you're just one fucking person that works in a call center or accounts payable or fucking the legal department. Out of that whole organization, you're not qualified to comment on programming and programming controls. I know that's a humbling, shitty thing to say, but that is the truth. You don't get to just storm in somewhere and demand that they change their whole shit because something a person said on a program made you sad for 10 minutes. That isn't how life fucking works. And I know that there's people listening to this who think, yeah, Aid comes across as a sort of, you know, a left-leaning, socialist, sensitive guy. But then I listened to this episode where he was actually on Dave Chappelle's side, and it really opened my eyes. He can be a bit of a cunt. No, I'm not saying like I'm supporting Dave Chappelle endlessly. I understand that what he said was ignorant and misguided and kind of lazy and shit. But to my mind, that's all that it was. And if he cracked a similar set of jokes, or non-jokes in that case, you know, there was a lot that just simply was not, you know, I'm not a world-famous stand-up comedian, and Dave Chappelle's got, you know, 20 fucking specials on me, so what the fuck do I know? But I can tell you this, that from the little that I do know about comedy, from my very humble comedy career, I can tell you that there are like chunks of that special where there is seemingly no actual joke writing going on. It is literally him talking, a bit like a TED talk, you know, he's just giving you a story, and occasionally it's peppered with little tittering. And so it's, you know, if somebody did a 7 or 12 minute routine about childcare frustrations and knackered parents that I didn't like, I'd get it. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but I still don't think that gives you the right to fucking demand changes to an organisation where you're a fucking tiny cog in the machine. People get so bigged up by their presence on social media or by one tweet on social media that they think that that's it. They're a big dick now. Fuck it. I'm bigged up. I've managed to get to 5,000 followers on Twitter. So wait till Netflix get a load of me. It's like, no, you're not. Just enjoy the 5,000 followers or the 10,000 retweets or whatever the fuck it is. Just enjoy that and make some more points and start a blog and start a YouTube channel, and that's great. That's the whole thing with free speech, is that Dave Chappelle gets to say some shit. You get to disagree with it. You get to create a YouTube channel and moan about him. And somewhere along the line, enough people moan and enough people celebrate. And eventually what happens is standards improve and people avoid content like Dave Chappelle's. And then they start their own content. And absolutely, there is a place right now in the zeitgeist of stand-up comedy for a trans comic to come out and talk about their experience and share their stories. Funny, traumatic, cutting, witty. There is definitely a huge gap in the market for that kind of individual. But it can't be, like, the balance can't be set by somebody like Dave Chappelle cracking 5, 10, 15-minute routine about trans culture and trans issues, and then a load of people going on Twitter and saying, like, that's fucking bullshit, no, tear him down, blah, blah. No, that's not how this works. I know that that's not what some of you want to hear, but that's honestly, I can't see any way around it other than, logically, man, look at this. Look at it. It's like, that's how we progress, that's how we mature. We start these stimulating conversations and we correct people with our own content. And that's how we move forward. That was just something that popped in my head this morning. It was like about the differences, just to go back to this now, about the differences between politicians and stand-ups. Like, why do we scrutinise stand-up comedians and not hold politicians to account? Like, it gets to the point now where people get so irate on Twitter. They're like, that fucking Dave Chappelle, he's such a cunt. Like, who does he think he is talking about my life and my experience? I'll tell you what, I'm never voting for him again. Like, you're treating him like he's a politician, like he's standing for office. He's not. He's just a guy who started doing stand-up and talking about stuff. And a lot, I was about to say a lot of that special, there is actually some salient points to be made and to be drawn from that. He does talk about how, he comes from a background where if somebody wrongs you in public, you might call them a bitch, or you might call them a bitch N-word, and how that's now become sort of double problematic because, obviously nobody wants to hear that kind of language out in the open, somebody calling someone else that. But now in his context, with the situation he's dug himself into, calling somebody that kind of language is double bad for him. So it's this like devices and comedic writing that can be appreciated, I think, in that special. And there's another thing about feminism in there where I proper lolled, where he I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but basically sort of it ends with him saying like, now we've come full circle. Now we're back at square one sort of thing, where he talks about, how he should be the male leader of the feminist movement sort of thing. And there's a lot of it, there's bits in the special where I'm like, he's pretty fucking good. But there's a lot of it also, that I agree is just lazy and shit. So I don't know why we get to this point where we scrutinise and hold him to account, but we don't hold politicians to account. And I wonder, is it something along the lines of that in the left of the political sphere, we've come to accept that people like Boris Johnson, people like Donald Trump, people like fucking, Mark Francois and, whoever else, they very, very rarely get held to account. Like, Boris Johnson is never going to lose his house. He's never going to be alone. There's always going to be some sad sack fucking trophy wife cunt who's going to cling on to him, be taken to an embassy dinner and taken away to a stately home for them. He's never going to be alone. He's never going to lose his house. He's never going to be poor. The chances of him being held to account are so slim. And it's the same for Trump. Like, people say he might go to jail. People say he's being sued. He might go bankrupt. I can't see it. People like Donald Trump never end up poor or in jail or, closest thing, maybe Bernie Madoff ended up going to jail, right? But, I just can't see it. So I wonder if on the left of the political sphere, is it as simple and psychological as we have come to accept that people very rarely get held to account, that there's never really any recourse for us. There's never, we can try to hold these motherfuckers to account and scrutinise them and say shit like, hey, I heard you said grab them by the pussy. But then what happens? What actually happens? Fucking nothing. Teflon Don carries on, gets elected. We can try and say, hey, Johnson, I heard that you flew your mistress around on public money. I heard that you shoehorned her into meetings that she wasn't really qualified to go on. What do you have to say about that? What about the Downing Street flat refurb costs? What about that? What about these donations? Should we hold you to account? No? Okay. Fucking blinding. So we've given up on being able to hold these people to account because we live in this post-truth state. We live in this world where the idea of these people having to face repercussions for their actions and their personalities and the way that they fucking treat people, that idea is gone. It feels like it's history. And so the closest thing we can get to it, to feeling like we've righted a wrong, is when a stand-up comedian says something a bit problematic, and then we're like, right, he has to pay for this, and there's actually a slim chance that you might get them taken off the platform, that you might get an uptick in your dopamine when Netflix or Amazon or the BBC or whoever put out a press release and say, on reflection, we don't feel that this content met the standards that we commit to as part of our blah blah. Is that what it is? Because sometimes it feels a bit like that. Like, this is the closest we're ever going to get to righting a wrong. And so this is what we do. We just trip switch into bashing stand-up comedians. And the fucked up thing about it is, you know, not all comedians are left-wing. Absolutely not. Famously, there's about 10 or 15 comedians who all claim to be, I'm the lone voice of right-wing comedy. They always fucking say that. But there's still a huge proportion of stand-up comedy is left-leaning, at least publicly left-leaning. And so this idea that we have to reprimand and bash and tear off of platforms stand-up comedians to further the left cause, that seems to me to be misguided. That seems to be incredibly short-termist to me. Like, let's tear down Dave Chappelle. Well, great. Okay, all you're going to do is piss off people like Joe Rogan, who's already sort of, you know, in some arguments, in some scenarios, kind of alt-right, kind of vaccine skeptic, that sort of individual. You know, you're going to piss off your Bill Burr. You're going to piss off maybe even people like Sarah Silverman, who are, you know, turbo left, super socialist. And what you're going to do is you're going to project this idea that the left is just this factionalized sack of rats that just like fighting amongst each other, and that's never going to fucking fix anything. It's like it sort of brings me back to British politics, doesn't it? It's like, how can the left ever really succeed in the UK? God, my voice is breaking up. How can the left ever really succeed and find electoral success in Britain when every other week some faction of Labour are tearing Starmer down, hashtag Starmer out? Or, you know, there's talk about what the left of Labour are arguing with like the Blairites, the moderates, and, you know, then you've got the fucking Lib Dems saying, well, we're going to do blah, yeah, and then that takes a chunk out of the Labour vote, and then the Greens are like, we're the only ones that are taking green commitment seriously and actually saying we will commit to do. Then that takes all the environmentalists out of the Labour vote, and then before you know it, you've got, you know, 3, 4, 5 cuts out of the left vote, factionalising, and then Labour never stand a fucking chance. And then the Tories, meanwhile, are just like, yeah, well, you know, I am a racist motherfucker and I would absolutely vote for the National Front, but gotta vote Tory, haven't I? You know, they all get behind the Tories. They all just club together because they know that if they factionalise, then Labour will get in. You know? So in their respect, they're smarter electorally than the left are. The left are purist and hugely objective. And it really doesn't do us any favours at all. It, like, Dominic Raab's constituency is always the example that I wheel out. He managed to secure his seat in, I think it's Esham, is it? Or Esher in Surrey. By a margin of like 1,000 votes or something. It was pretty slim. And if you look at the results of the area, guess fucking what? If the left vote hadn't been split, if the Lib Dem vote, candidate had just said, do you know what? I'm going to stand back. I'm going to hold back, and all of my candidates should go with the Labour voter, the Labour candidate here. If the Lib Dems had just stood down in that constituency, we wouldn't have fucking Dominic Raab. He'd be history. He would have been like, fuck, well, I tried my best. Anyway, back to my shitty, cunty law job that I had before. Back to my... What was he doing before? I think he worked in the civil service, actually. He's got an NDA against his name. Did you guys know that? He's got an NDA against him and nobody knows what it's about. I did a bit of prep a while ago for a Dominic Raab TikTok because I thought, that'd be fun. Because he's such a he just looks like a fucking psychopath, doesn't he? The vein popping out, his great big bulging eyes. He's quite muscular as well. He goes to the gym twice a day. Like doesn't he like fucking black belt in judo or something? He's quite tonk. And I just got this feeling like he's gonna get in trouble sooner or later. He just seemed, when you shouldn't judge the book by the cover, but the cover of that book does not look good. And I wonder if, he's going to get into some sort of serious trouble. There'll be some sort of big scandal. And so I wondered, maybe I'll do my prep now, right? So I started prepping a few bits and pieces about him. And yes, he's got an NDA wrapped around some former aide in his office. Nobody knows what the fuck he did to her. just like, yeah, here's some fucking money and sign this. Never talk about this. You talk about this, we'll take the fucking money back. Oh, okay, all right. So nobody knows what it's about, apart from him and David Davis. So there's that. There was a thing where he was in a town hall meeting. It's on YouTube, where he calls. What the fuck was it now? I think he dismissed the need for food banks or something. He's just like basically minimizing the urgency and the seriousness of food banks, something like that. And people were literally shouting at me in the town hall. So there's that as well. There was an aide resigned from a role in his office. This is fucked, because he had an hour and a quarter for lunch every day, and she booked him into a meeting that would shave a quarter of an hour off of his lunchtime gym session, right? And so what do you think the guy who looks like he's Tonk and has got a vein bulging out the side of his head and looks like and says he's a black belt in judo or whatever, what do you think that calm, centered, totally non-violent person did in response to his junior aide taking 15 minutes for lunch break so he couldn't be in the gym for... Yeah, he fucking went schizo at her. He absolutely blew his fucking lid, shouted at her, lambasted her, and said, basically, never, ever book into my gym time! And so, yeah, by all accounts, she burst into tears, and, I think she was then fired by that. I'm going way off on a tangent here, I'm sorry, but I think she was then fired by her boss in that department when they found out that she was an escort. She was doing some sort of like nighttime work as a paid-for date for businessmen and let's be real, probably politicians, doing, we don't know what. Not really. I mean, come on. I love when people say escorts are literally just paid for dates, like I just did. Look, I'm just being polite when people say, yeah, well, she did a bit of escorting, which, not like that. She was just, a paid companion to go to business. Really? Come on. We're all grown-ups here. Like, this idea that escort... Like, I might, at some point in the future, go overseas and go to business dinners and shit. But I'm not paying someone to come to dinner with me. If I want someone to come to dinner with me, I'll go to somebody in the office and say, oh, do you want to grab some dinner later? That is a different conversation to, I wonder if I can pay a young woman to spend time with me. Like, we all know what the fuck. So if she's, she was an escort, sucking some dick, clearly. And anyway, they found out about it and they fired her for presumably bringing the department into ill repute. I suppose to some extent, the conversation there really should be, were they paying her enough to be this junior aide in a government department in London where rents are incredibly, prohibitively expensive? How much was that role paying? Did she ask for a raise first? Was it denied? Was she benchmarked against other people? Were there men in the same department that were earning more than her, etc., rather than... Are you sucking some dick? Oh, that is disgusting. Get your whorish mouth out of this office. Which I suspect it was probably more the latter than the former. Anyway, guys, listen. This has been fun. I do enjoy doing these episodes because I get to just go off on my own like little like dance in Wonderland sort of thing. I just get to talk to myself without the inconvenience of being interrupted by my fucking guests. No, it's, obviously I enjoy the guests. I enjoy learning from the guests and tabling questions to them. And it is genuinely, I really enjoy learning from people when I chat to them and getting their thoughts on stuff. But it is also nice sometimes to just do these sort of just me shows where I can kind of, freewheel a little bit more. And also, you know what? My mic on the podcast when I'm interviewing people, that mic, I spent 300 quid on that fucking mic because a guy on YouTube was doing reviews of them and he reckoned that it was quite good. And I spent, I think it's about 150 on the preamp, but it's still coming through. Like, it doesn't sound great, does it? It sounds kind of like a bit trebly and very, very slightly echoey. And I don't know, like I'm really trying to spend some time getting it to mix right and shit, but you know, I've got 2 kids and a full-time job, and it's just not easy to do that shit. So please bear with me. Hopefully it's not causing you guys too much aural discomfort. And anyway, yeah, so I'll be back this coming Friday. I'm going to interview the singer from the band The Microdance, who's actually a sort of old friend of mine. Back in the day, I used to be in bands. I used to play guitar and sing, and then I did loads of singer-songwritery stuff. And anyway, he and I were in a band for a very, very short period of time together. But since then, he's gone on to release through a label, but then also self-release. I think he's on his 3rd album now, and he's incredibly passionate about the state of the music industry and what streaming has done, and people's inability to want to buy music any longer and support the acts that they love. And I did an episode of the podcast where I interviewed a lady called Emily Davis a while back, where we talked about Spotify, and it's going to be really interesting now to get his thoughts on what streaming has done and where he sees his music and bands like his going in the future. Like, is it as bleak as I think it is, or is there a way out? Has he come up with some way to benefit from the status quo, in the same way that, you know what, like, there are artists out there who are making a shit ton of money, so is there something that he could, like a leaf that he could take out of their book, like that sort of thing? That's how I imagine that conversation is going to go. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you're interested in tech, music, the arts, it's likely to be a little bit less political, that episode, than others, so maybe skip it if you're not into that. And I will be back in a couple of weeks with another guest. And yeah, thanks very much once again for tuning in. I'll catch up with you all soon. All right, ciao, bye-bye.